Olivia laughed, twirling her wine glass between her fingers, the dim light of the upscale lounge reflecting off the deep red liquid inside. Her friends leaned in, smirking, their perfectly made-up faces glowing with amusement as she continued her story. "Derek, please. He's too soft to leave me," she scoffed, shaking her head. The words hit like a slap. I had entered the lounge unnoticed, returning from the bar with her favorite drink, a glass of Merlot, just in time to hear my name spill from her lips, coated in mockery. I froze for just a second, just long enough to register the laughter that followed. "He's obsessed with me," Olivia continued, tilting her head in an exaggerated sigh. "I could probably cheat on him right in front of his face, and he'd still beg me to stay. It's almost cute. Almost." The group erupted into laughter again, and my fingers tightened around the stem of the glass. I felt the weight of my heartbeat against my ribs, steady and controlled, like the rhythm of a clock counting down to something inevitable. The old me, the version Olivia believed I still was, might have walked away, pretended not to hear, let it slide with a forced smile and a quiet night of overthinking, but that version of me was gone. I exhaled slowly, willing my pulse to remain calm. I didn't need to confront her. I didn't need a dramatic scene in front of her enablers, nor did I want one. That wasn't my style. Olivia thrived on theatrics, on feeling important, on knowing she could manipulate the situation to her advantage. She would cry, she would twist the narrative, and in the end, she would make me look like the fool. No, I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Instead, I set her drink down on a nearby table, untouched, and turned on my heel, walking away without a word. By the time Olivia and her friends were giggling their way back to our house later that night, she had no idea she was walking straight into a nightmare of her own making. She wouldn't know yet that our shared bank account had been emptied, that every piece of her designer clothing, every handbag, every luxury item she had accumulated under my roof was now packed neatly in trash bags, sitting outside. That her access to my credit cards had been revoked. She wouldn't know yet that I had already changed the locks, that I had called the building security and ensured she was no longer welcome, that I had wiped every trace of her from my life while she was still sipping overpriced cocktails and reveling in her own delusions. No, Olivia wouldn't know any of it. Not until the morning. Not until she stood barefoot on the front porch, stunned and shivering in her silk robe, staring at the locked door that once welcomed her without question. Not until she reached for her phone only to find a single unread message from me. "Good boss." The first thing Olivia noticed when she woke up was the cold. Not the kind of cold that came from an open window or a misplaced blanket, but the kind that seeped into her bones, creeping up her spine as if her body already knew something was wrong before her mind could catch up. She reached across the bed, stretching out her fingers, expecting to feel the familiar warmth of Derek's presence. Her brows knitted together as she blinked herself fully awake. The bed beside her was empty, untouched. The indentation where Derek usually slept was already smoothed out, as if he had never been there at all. She sat up, running a hand through her tangled hair, exhaling in irritation. It wasn't unusual for Derek to be up early, but something about the silence felt different. There was no sound of the shower running, no soft clinking of coffee mugs in the kitchen, no morning routine unfolding like it always did. With a sigh, Olivia reached for her phone on the nightstand, only to be met with a sharp sting of panic when the screen refused to light up. Dead. "Damn it," she muttered, tossing it aside before shoving off the covers and standing up. She padded across the room, heading for the bathroom, expecting to find Derek shaving or getting dressed. Instead, the space was eerily empty. She hesitated, staring at the sink. The cup that held their toothbrushes was missing one. His side of the counter, usually cluttered with aftershave, cologne, and his watch, was bare. A strange unease settled in her stomach as she stepped back into the bedroom. That's when she noticed it. The closet door was open, but only on her side. Derek's clothes were gone. The hangers where his tailored suits had once hung in perfect order were now empty. His shoes, his ties, even the small safe where he kept important documents, vanished. It was as if he had been wiped clean from existence, as if he had never lived there at all. Her breath caught in her throat. Heart pounding, she rushed out of the bedroom and down the hall. The apartment was unnervingly quiet. No television, murmuring in the background, no faint hum of Derek's morning routine. She reached the front door and pulled it open, expecting to see his car in the driveway. Instead, her gaze fell on a collection of neatly packed trash bags lined up by the curb, A sickening realization washed over her. Frantic now, she stepped outside, barefoot on the cold pavement, and tore open the first bag. Shoes, clothes. The second bag, jewelry, boxes, handbags. The third, photo frames, torn from the walls. Their memories discarded like garbage. Her stomach twisted. She scrambled back to the front door, reaching for the handle, but it wouldn't turn. She twisted harder. Locked. A breathless laugh escaped her, disbelief setting in. She fumbled for the keypad, typing in the security code she had used 100 times before. Access denied. No, she whispered, trying again. Access denied. The third attempt sent her nerves into overdrive. What the hell is going on? She muttered under her breath. Her hands shook as she tried again, this time pressing the button for the intercom. Nothing. The security system wasn't just changed, it had been reset. It hit her all at once. Derek was gone, and he had taken everything with him. She staggered back, her breathing shallow, her mind scrambling for explanations. This had to be some kind of mistake, a misunderstanding. Her phone, dead. Her house, locked. Her belongings, dumped at the curb like she was some random tenant who had overstayed her lease. Desperation clawed at her chest as she sprinted to the garage. Maybe his car was still inside. Maybe he hadn't actually left. Maybe she slammed her palm against the keypad on the wall. Access denied. She stared at the glowing red light, pulse pounding in her ears. Derek hadn't just left. He had erased her. With shaking fingers, she reached for the only lifeline she had left, the landline inside the house. But she wasn't inside. She was locked out, standing in the driveway in nothing but a silk robe and a rising wave of sheer, unfiltered panic. She turned toward the street, scanning the neighborhood. The early morning light cast long shadows over the pavement, the air crisp with the chill of dawn. A jogger passed by on the sidewalk, barely sparing her a glance. For the first time in years, Olivia felt small, invisible, replaceable. She clenched her jaw, forcing herself to breathe. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Olivia stood frozen on the front steps, the chill of the morning biting at her skin as reality pressed down on her like a weight she couldn't shake off. The locked door, the discarded trash bags, the absence of Derek, it all pointed to one brutal conclusion. She had been erased. A lump formed in her throat as she forced herself to think. This had to be a mistake. There was no way Derek, her quiet, predictable, dependable Derek, had actually left her like this. Not without a warning, not without a fight. She swallowed hard and turned back toward the curb. The bag sat there like a silent condemnation, filled with the remnants of her life. She crouched down, yanking one open again, her fingers digging through silk blouses and designer jeans. She recognized everything. Gifts he had given her, outfits she had worn on their vacations, shoes she had strutted in on their date nights. But that was all it was now. Stuff. Worthless, lifeless, dumped on the sidewalk for anyone to see. Her breath hitched and a wave of anger burned through her shock. No, Derek didn't get to do this. He didn't get to make a decision this big, this final, without even speaking to her. He didn't get to humiliate her, to make her feel disposable, to strip away everything she had without warning. Hands shaking, she shoved herself upright and stormed to the door again, slamming her fist against it. "Derek," she shouted. "Derek, open the damn door." Silence. She hit the door again, harder this time. "This isn't funny. Open the door." Still nothing. She spun around, scanning the driveway. His car was gone. His parking spot, always so predictable, so constant, was empty. Her breath came faster now, panic clawing its way up her throat. She needed her phone. But as she stormed back toward the trash bag, she realized it wouldn't matter. Her phone was dead. And if Derek had planned this, no, if he had really planned this, then he wouldn't have left her any easy way back in. That thought sent a shiver down her spine. She hadn't seen this coming, not even for a second. Derek had always been there. He was solid, unshakable, predictable. He wasn't the kind of man who pulled stunts like this. He wasn't the type to make drastic moves. At least, that's what she had believed. And wasn't that the problem? She had underestimated him. She clenched her jaw and forced herself to breathe. Fine. He wanted to play games. She would play. She needed to find a way in. Her fingers darted to the small necklace around her neck, pulling off the delicate key charm Derek had given her years ago. It was a spare key. Her emergency backup. She strode to the side gate, heart hammering, slipping the key into the lock. It didn't fit. He changed it. A cold sense of finality hit her. Derek hadn't just left. He had planned this. He had taken every precaution to make sure she couldn't simply waltz back in and fix things with a pout and an apology, and that terrified her. Her stomach twisted as she moved to the back of the house, trying the sliding glass door. Locked. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, peering inside. The house was spotless. Not just clean, but empty. The absence of Derek's presence was one thing, but now that she really looked, she saw it. The living room was stripped of anything that had once felt like him. The framed photos of their trips, gone. His books, gone. The throw blanket he always kept on the couch, gone. This wasn't just a fight. This was over. A choke sound escaped her throat. No, this wasn't happening. She needed to talk to him. She raced back to the front of the house, gripping the dead phone in her hand like it could magically turn on if she willed it hard enough. She needed to charge it. She needed access to her accounts, to her contacts. A neighbor's car pulled into their driveway across the street. Olivia's head snapped up. Mrs. Taylor, a sweet but nosy woman in her 60s, stepped out, glancing at Olivia with hesitant curiosity. Olivia forced a smile, wrapping her robe tighter around herself. Mrs. Taylor, hey, could I borrow your phone for a second? Mine's dead. The older woman hesitated. She had always liked Derek, had always thought Olivia was a little too much, a little too loud, a little too entitled, and now Olivia could see it in her face, the judgment. The knowledge that something had shifted. Well, dear, I'm just heading inside. Perhaps you can... Mrs. Taylor, please, Olivia pressed, voice tight. I need to call Derek. At the mention of his name, the older woman's lips pursed. She knows. Olivia's stomach twisted as the woman offered a clipped nod. I'm sure you'll figure things out, dear. Best of luck. And with that, she disappeared inside her house. Olivia stood there breathless. The realization hit her like a freight train. She wasn't just locked out of her home. She was locked out of her life. Her finances, her comfort, her status had all been tied to Derek. And now, in the span of a single night, he had cut the strings, leaving her dangling with nothing. Panic surged up her throat, clawing at her like a living thing. She had laughed at Derek, mocked him, treated him like a backup plan, and now he had shown her exactly who was really in control. Olivia's breathing was shallow as she stood on the sidewalk, arms wrapped tightly around herself. The morning air, crisp and biting, sent a shiver through her body, but it wasn't the cold that made her tremble. It was the realization, sinking deeper and deeper into her bones. She had lost everything. Her fingers twitched toward her robe pocket again, desperate for her phone, though she already knew it was useless. The screen remained dark, mocking her with its silence. Derek had thought of everything. Panic clawed at her chest. She needed to act, fast. She scanned the street, hoping for someone, anyone, who could help her. But it was early, and their quiet neighborhood was still asleep. No one was rushing to her aid. No one was even watching. For the first time in years, Olivia was truly alone. Her mind raced. She had options. She just had to think. She turned back to the house, clenching her jaw. Maybe she could force her way in. Maybe if she broke a window... No, that would be a terrible look. She wasn't about to have the police called on her for trying to break into her own house. She let out a frustrated breath and turned away. If she couldn't get inside, she needed to reach someone who could help. She had friends. She had influence. People liked her. And didn't they? Her confidence wavered as she thought about last night, the way she had sat at that table, laughing at Derek's expense. Her friends had egged her on, encouraged her, but they weren't really her friends, were they? They were friends with Olivia, the woman who always had the perfect outfit, the perfect house, the perfect man who never questioned her. Would they still be around now that she was this Olivia, the one standing barefoot in a silk robe next to a pile of garbage? Her fingers tightened around the edges of her robe as she walked toward the street, her eyes locked on the one place that could give her the help she needed. Her car. If nothing else, she still had that. She reached for the handle and yanked. Locked. Olivia let out a bitter laugh, pressing her forehead against the window. Of course, Derek had planned this too. Her stomach twisted as she realized she didn't even know if she had access to her bank account anymore. She needed to check. She needed her phone. Her thoughts snapped to the only place she could go. Her friends. Olivia straightened her shoulders. She wasn't defeated. Not yet. She turned on her heel, walking briskly down the sidewalk, her mind racing. Amanda. Amanda would help. She had been the loudest last night, the one who had laughed the hardest. If anyone was going to stand by Olivia, it would be her. It took her 15 minutes to walk to Amanda's house, and by the time she arrived, her bare feet were aching from the cold pavement. She rang the doorbell, swallowing down her pride. Seconds passed. Then the door cracked open. Amanda's perfectly styled hair and skeptical eyes greeted her. Olivia! Amanda's gaze flicked down to the robe, the messy hair, the panic in her expression. What the hell are you doing here? Olivia forced a smile, pushing past the lump in her throat. Can I come in? I need a little help. Amanda hesitated, That hesitation was enough to send Olivia's heart plummeting. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Amanda was supposed to pull her inside, hand her a mimosa, and roll her eyes about how ridiculous Derek was being. Instead, she looked uncomfortable. Amanda, Olivia pressed, her voice softer now. Come on. It's me. Amanda sighed, rubbing her temple. Liv, I don't know what happened, but maybe you should talk to Derek. Olivia blinked. I would, if I could. He's locked me out. He's frozen my accounts. She sucked in a breath. I just need to use your phone. Just for a minute. Amanda hesitated again. Olivia's stomach twisted. That was all she needed to see. You knew. Olivia's voice dropped, barely a whisper. Amanda looked away. You knew this was going to happen. Olivia continued, her voice rising with every word. That's why you're hesitating. You knew. Amanda exhaled. Derek didn't tell me anything, Liv, but we all saw it coming. Olivia took a step back, her body turning numb. Excuse me? Amanda frowned, crossing her arms. Derek's a great guy, a really great guy, and you've been walking all over him for years. We all thought he'd never leave, but last night, when he just smiled and didn't say a word, she let out a slow breath. I knew he was done. Olivia stared at her, disbelief washing over her in waves. Amanda didn't even look guilty. She wasn't scrambling for excuses, wasn't trying to soften the blow. She was just stating a fact, like Olivia had done this to herself, like she deserved it. Her throat burned as she swallowed back the anger and humiliation rising inside her. So that's it? She asked, voice sharp. You just gonna turn your back on me? Amanda's expression softened, but it wasn't enough. I think you should go home, Olivia. I don't have a home, she snapped. Amanda's lips pressed into a thin line. Then I think you should figure out why. The door shut in her face. Olivia stood there, stunned, her mind blank. The people she had counted on had already decided she wasn't worth saving. And Derek? He had been the first to realize it. Olivia stood in front of Amanda's door for a long time, staring at the polished wood as if it might magically swing open again, as if Amanda would change her mind, realize what a mistake she was making, and invite her inside. But the silence behind the door told her everything. She was on her own. Her fingers curled into fists as she turned away, her steps slow and unsteady. She had nowhere to go. No home. No money. No one willing to offer her a place to stay. The full weight of it crashed down on her. Derek had planned this. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but with the cold precision of a man who had finally had enough. He had seen this moment coming long before she had, and instead of confronting her, instead of yelling or begging or fighting, he had done something far worse. He had walked away. She wasn't sure if she hated him for it or if she was just terrified of what it meant. She didn't even know who she was without him. Her feet carried her back toward the house, though she wasn't sure why. Maybe because it was the only place that still felt real. Maybe because some part of her still believed there had to be a way back inside, a way to fix this, a way to make Derek undo whatever the hell he had done. But when she got there, nothing had changed. The bags of her belongings still sat at the curb like a monument to her downfall. The locks were still changed. The house, once warm and familiar, now looked at her like a stranger, cold and unyielding. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to make Derek feel the way she was feeling, but he was gone. And Olivia, she was finally feeling what it meant to be powerless. With a shaky breath, she pulled out her phone, determined to get it charged. She needed access to her accounts, to anything that could give her leverage. A nearby cafe was just opening, and she slipped inside, keeping her head down as she hurried toward the back corner. She found an outlet and plugged in her phone, tapping her fingers against the table as she waited for the screen to flicker back to life. When it did, her heart pounded. She immediately opened her banking app. Declined. Her credit cards. She let out a sharp breath. She had never felt broke before. Even when she had been between jobs, even when she had overspent, there had always been Derek, his stability, his patience, his unwavering presence. And now she had nothing. Her pride screamed at her to call him, to demand answers, to remind him that this wasn't who he was supposed to be. He was supposed to be predictable, forgiving, hers. But when she pulled up his contact, her stomach dropped. This number is no longer in service. Her hand shook as she stared at the screen. Derek hadn't just cut her off financially. He had erased every connection between them. She had underestimated him, and it had cost her everything. For the first time, she wondered, had he always been capable of this? Had she simply been too blind to see it? Or had she been the one who turned him into this version of himself? A deep, unfamiliar fear settled in her chest, because for the first time in her life, Olivia wasn't in control. And the worst part, no one was coming to save her.